You can add 3D text to your 3D camera views similarly to how you can add it to your 2D views. Let's take a look at the basic settings for 3D text and some examples of how to add it to your 3D views. The first step in adding 3D text is to position your 3D camera so that it's directly facing the plane that you want to add the 3D text in. So I'm going to reposition my 3D camera until it's facing this end panel. Next, you want to double check what your text defaults are. So let's go up to Edit Active View, and then over on the left we're on Selected Defaults, and we have the kitchen and bath rich text defaults active. Let's go ahead and create a copy of this and make them more appropriate for 3D views. So I'm going to click on the New Rich Text Default button, and then I'm going to edit the name of it so at the end of it it reads 3D, and then go ahead and click on OK. And then here we can make some edits to the text formatting. I know for in an interior 3D scene that's a little bit easier if the text font is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to make that adjustment here. And then next, over on the left hand side, I find that the text is a little bit cleaner in the scene if I have a background fill and a border going around it. So I can go ahead and add those options here. I'll check border, and you can also change the color and the line style of that border if you want to. And then the fill, I'll go ahead and check that. You can change the color of the fill here, or if you want it to be a little bit more transparent. And then underneath options, there are a few 3D specific settings. First is this setting that says faces camera. As I rotate my 3D view, the 3D text will rotate with it if this setting is checked. If this setting is unchecked, the 3D text will just display in a vertical or horizontal plane that you had generated it in. I'm going to go ahead and leave this checked. And then the next setting is ignore object clipping. If this is unchecked and your 3D text is close to an object, the 3D text might be appearing to go into the object. I like to leave this checked so that it appears as if it's generating on top of the object. With these settings in place, let's go ahead and click on OK, and then go ahead and click on OK again to get back to our 3D view. Next, to add the 3D text, we can go up to our text tools and then come over to rich text. And notice how as I move my mouse into the 3D scene, my mouse has been updated to a dashed set of crosshairs with a circle in it, and it's giving me feedback as to which plane I'm going to be adding the 3D text to. So here I'm on the face of the cabinet, the side of the hood, the side of the cabinet, the floor, and then I'm going to come over to the side of the end panel and click once. And this gives me a feedback grid that I can then use to place the 3D text. So I'm going to go ahead and click about there. I can then type in my 3D text, click on OK, and you can see how that 3D text got added to the scene. Now for me, this text is a little bit elongated and I would rather it wrap over a couple of lines. So I can click on that text, and over near the border of it there are handles that you can use. I'm going to click on this handle and adjust it until it wraps over a few lines. And then next, if I rotate my camera view, notice how it's maybe not directly in the middle of the end panel. I can click on that 3D text and come over to our move handle in the middle and click and move it in that plane. And then if I rotate my camera view and I want to bring it a little bit closer to that end panel, if I come over to that text and I click on that move handle, notice how it still wants to move it just in that plane that I had initially created it in. I'll press spacebar to deselect it. But if I click on that text again and then click on that move handle one more time, I get these arrows that allow me to reposition it within the scene. And I'm going to come over to this blue arrow, left click on it, and then hold the control key on my keyboard to override snapping and bring it a little bit closer to the end panel. Next, I want to add an arrow going from the bottom of the text box to the end panel. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to do this. The first step is to try to get your 3D camera at eye level with the text. So I'm just going to move my camera until it's in a good position. And then next, if I select on that text, there's a little extra diamond handle at the bottom of it. I can left click and hold on that diamond handle to bring out the first segment of the leader line. And you can see how that generated. And then next, there's another diamond handle at the end of that first line. and I can left click and drag and bring that over to my end panel. And that's looking like it's in a pretty good position. Just like with the text, if you want to move it around, you can click on it and then move it. Also notice that there is the move object handle that you can use to move it. And then if you specifically wanted to move the end of that arrow so that it's pointing at a different location, you can click on the arrow, click on the little circle point for that arrow, and then you can use the icon to move the end of that arrow to a different position. Let's look at some tips and tools for precisely positioning 3D text. For this example, we have a towel dispenser integrated into a countertop, and we have an arrow coming off of the center of the towel dispenser leading to some 3D text. We need to recognize that there's no vertical plane in this area that we can establish our 3D text in, so we're going to have to establish a plane somewhere else and move the 3D text into the appropriate position. So I'm going to go over to our text tools, select the rich text tool, and then I'm going to establish the plane directly on the countertop. So I'm going to bring my mouse over there, click once to establish the plane, and then click again for where I want to position it, and then type in my desired text, and then click on OK. And then if we rotate into the 3D view, you can see how the text is currently positioned, and let's move it so that it's a little bit more centered on the towel dispenser. It's easiest to center 3D text on another object if the 3D text does not rotate with your camera when you're moving and positioning it. So let's double click on this 3D text to open up its specification, and on the options panel uncheck faces camera and then click on OK. And you can see how that 3D text is now positioned horizontally because I had established my plane on top of the horizontal countertop. Next, let's go ahead and rotate this 3D text 90 degrees so that it is facing vertically. So I'm going to go ahead and select the 3D text, and in the bottom toolbar, when you have the faces camera option unchecked, a setting becomes available that says rotate object. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and then we get an icon in our screen that lets us rotate this 3D text. So I'm going to come over to these arrows and left click and rotate it until it's facing vertically, and then release my mouse, and you can see how that is now facing in a vertical position within the plan. Next, let's go ahead and move it so that it is in a better area over in this area. So I'm going to click on the text, click on the move handle in the middle of it, and then use the arrows to shift it around. And let's move it vertically as well. And then next we want to center this 3D text on the towel dispenser in the countertop. So I'm going to click on the 3D text, and then in the bottom toolbar use the center object tool, come over to the center of the towel dispenser and click once. And there we have that 3D text moved into a new position. And then the next step is to add an arrow coming off of the 3D text. So I'm going to come up to the 3D text and click. And notice how I clicked towards the bottom of the 3D text here, and our diamond handle to draw out the arrow is positioned along the bottom. But if I come over to the left hand side and click, that diamond handle to add the arrow is along the left hand side, and then I can just left click, click and drag and bring it to the center of the towel dispenser and release my mouse, and that is in an appropriate position. And then the last optional step here is if I want the towel dispenser to resume rotating with my 3D camera, I can double click on it, and on the options panel recheck faces camera and click on OK. And now the 3D text will rotate with my camera, but the arrow will remain affixed to the center of that towel dispenser. Let's look at another example of adding 3D text, this time using the leader line tool. I'm back in the 3D view, and I have my camera view facing the multi-switch along the wall. If we double click on the multi-switch, over on the object information panel, under the comment field, you can see that I have some information added here as to what all of the different buttons do, and we're going to use this comment field and a macro to automatically get information in the rich text leader line. So let's go ahead and cancel out of this, and then next go to our text tools, and we're going to select the leader line option. One comment about adding 3D text is that when you're locating the plane that you want to add the 3D text in, you can have that plane be located based on the bounding box of the object or on the drawing surface. If we look at the bounding box, you can see how it's going to select the whole front face of that switch. But if I come over to the option that says Draw on Surface, I can then select individual surfaces on the switch. I like the Draw on Bounding Box option. I find that it's a little bit easier for most scenarios. And then one other comment here is that there's this option that says Set Offset. When you click on this, it lets you determine how far offset from the position that you clicked your text will get added. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this to 0 so that it adds directly on the face of the switch, and then click on OK. And then with my leader line tool selected, come over to the switch. We can see that I have the vertical face of the switch, and I'm going to left click once to establish the plane. I've established the plane and I get the feedback grid, and then I can come over to the switch and snap to the center of it and right click and draw out a line that will be the arrow segment. Release the mouse and continue the line that will be the second segment, and right click again to place it. I can then add my text, and then because I had snapped directly onto the switch, I can insert a macro with information about it. So towards the top right of the dialog, I'll come to where it says Insert Macro, Referenced Object, Comment, and you can see how that gets populated and displays. And then I can then click on OK. And then that leader line and 3D text will be added to the scene, and I can make modifications to it as I need to. You can also have object labels or callouts display as 3D text. Let's take a look at how this works with our example being cabinet labels. The first step in seeing the cabinet labels display as 3D text is to turn on the layer for the cabinet labels. So I'm going to open up my active layer display options, select on one of my cabinets, and then over on the cabinet labels layer, just check the box in the display column, and you can see how in the 3D view those cabinet labels got turned on. If you had a schedule in your plan and in the schedule settings had it set to use a callout instead of the label, you would see the callout displayed here instead. Let's talk about some settings specific to 3D object labels. The text formatting settings for 3D object labels are controlled by the text style being used by the labels layer. So I'm going to click on the cabinet, come over to cabinet labels, and down to the bottom here there's a section that says text style, and you'll notice that I'm using the default label style. I can click on the Define button next to it to make modifications to it. Now, before you start loosely making modifications to the text style, be aware that any modifications you make here will be reflected anywhere the text style is used in the plan. For example, this will affect the display of cabinet labels in our 2D floor plan view, our window labels also use this text style, and many other items in the plan are also using this text style. So just make sure to be a bit cautious and deliberate when making changes there. With that being said, let's go ahead and click on the Define button. With our saved text styles open, let's go ahead and click on the Edit button. And here at the top you can change information about the font being used, some formatting settings, the character height, and then under Options, let's look at some settings specific to 3D object labels. First is this setting that says Face Camera. When this setting is checked, anytime you rotate your camera, the label will rotate with it to always face the camera. If I uncheck this and then click on OK, and then click on OK one more time, notice how the labels are now facing in a vertical position, and as I rotate my camera, the labels maintain that vertical position. Let's get back into that text style by selecting the cabinet, selecting the cabinet labels layer, coming down to the text style and click on Define, and then click on Edit. And then let's recheck Face Camera. And then the next setting here is Ignore Object Clipping. If this is unchecked when your label is too close to the object, it might clip inside of it. When this option is checked, it will generate and appear to always be in front of the object. Next is a setting that says Reposition with Camera. When this setting is unchecked, like it is now, the object label will always remain on the front or top of the object, depending on the object and its settings. But if I check this option and then click on OK, and then click on OK one more time, as I rotate my camera through the 3D view, notice how the object label, specifically over in this area, will jump so it's on the top of the cabinet or facing the front of the cabinet, depending on where my camera's position is. If we get back into the settings again for that text style, and then uncheck that, and then click on OK, the object's label will always remain stationary and will not reposition with the camera. Another setting here, if we get back into the text style settings, is this option that says transparent. If I were to check this, then our object labels would not have a white background, and instead we would be able to see through them. Let's recheck this reposition with camera setting. And then one other setting here is the text color. Currently I have this to be set by the layer, which you can see I'm on the cabinet labels layer, and it is set to be a blue color. If I click on OK and get over to this layer and then click on the color here, I can pick a new color that I would want to use. This is one way that you can differentiate label colors from each other when you have different objects using the same text style there. Let's go ahead and change that back to a blue color. And then there's also some label settings available directly within our object. Let's look at this end cabinet here and double click on it to open up the specification. And then over on the left hand side, go to label. And then here we can control that reposition with camera setting on an object by object basis. So remember, this setting makes it so that the object label remains stationary on the vertical or horizontal face of the cabinet and does not reposition with it as you rotate your camera. So notice in my preview right here how it jumped to the top when it's using the text style on setting. But if I switch this to off, it will just always remain stationary at the front face of the cabinet. Let's go ahead and switch this back to always use the text style. And then next down below underneath the orientation, faces camera, this is so that the label always rotates to face the camera, but I can change this to manual and it will just face in a vertical position. Let's go ahead and change this back to use as text style. And then right here there's an option for camera view display. Currently I have this set to automatic, but you can change this to show in this view or hide in this view so that it either always or never appears. If I change this to hide in the view and then I click on OK, notice how I no longer see the 3D display of that object label. If I open this cabinet back up and on the label panel still, under camera view display, switch this to show in view and click on OK, we can see that label, and if I rotate my view so that I am outside of the structure, notice how that 3D label is still showing in the view. Let's go ahead and open that back up and change it to automatic and then click on OK. And then one final note about labels is that you can reposition their view in 3D. If I zoom into the label, there's a little square handle right next to the center of it, and if I click on it, I then get this icon that I can use to reposition that label within the 3D view. And if I start moving the label around directly within the 3D view, if we open up that cabinet, you can see that under the camera view position and orientation settings, that has been switched to off, and instead it is manually set in the X, Y, and Z coordinates relative to the camera. A couple of final notes about manually added 3D text. First, the 3D text is on a layer, meaning you can turn on and off the display of it as needed. I have the active layer display options open, and if I come down to the text and click on it, you can see that it's on the text, kitchen, and bath layer, and I can just uncheck the display of it to hide it. And then if I ever want to turn that back on from my active layer display options, I can come down to that layer and then just recheck the display of it. And there it generates again in our scene. And then the final note about manually added 3D text is that the 3D text is specific to the camera view that you saved it in, meaning that if you close the camera view and you don't save it, that text that you added is lost. You can save your camera view by clicking the Save Active View button, or because you've added annotations to the view, when you go to close the camera, you'll get a message that says, do you wish to save the camera? You can click on yes. And then back in the plan view with the layer for the camera turned on, you can just double click on it to see that 3D text again.